coffee break. I'm Brandon Verhoff. I'm the chair of the Education Committee. We are excited to feature this networking opportunity with our Missouri Gateway chapter of the U.S. Green Building Council. Today, we might have some members and non-members, so thank you for joining us. Our chapter, like many other nonprofits throughout the country, rely on funding as the biggest source through our memberships. If you aren't already a member, please consider joining. We are also currently accepting submissions for our call for proposals. We've extended the deadline through September 30th. The goal for our coffee breaks are to provide an opportunity for our community to engage in conversational hot topics over a cup of coffee. Got your cup of Joe, right? Over a short 30-minute break. Our theme for today's conversation is LEED is now, where do we go next? We've had a really good conversation so far about all types of various different certifications. So today I'm excited to introduce our special guest, which is Ralph Bicknese. He's a LEED fellow, a LEED AP, BD+C, and member and committee for Climate Action is Design Excellence at the American Institute of Architects. Ralph is also a nationally recognized sustainable design leader with over 40 years of experience and is a principal and co-founder of Hellmuth and Bicknese Architects. Ralph's objective is for every act of design and construction to enrich life. So some guidelines before we get started. The option to click the grid view in the upper right-hand corner is to see more callers. The chat function is available for anyone wanting to put a little bit of context in there. Please be respectful of others, allow others to join in the conversation. Be mindful of not jumping over anyone speaking, but feel free to just jump through and talk without being called upon. But if you have something to say and aren't able to get into the conversation, feel free to just maybe use a reaction. And I'll try to get you into the conversation as we progress through. And also try to keep yourself muted unless speaking to avoid background noise. Without further ado, Ralph.
Thanks, Brandon. It's good to see so many familiar faces and a few new ones. So thanks for joining in. Excuse my scratchy throat. That's a little unexpected, but anyhow. So I'm going to speak for about maybe 10 minutes or so, then we'll do Q&A, and we'll just go through some thoughts real quickly. And already Hannah's posed a few thoughts that I think will be very relevant in the discussion at the end. So some of the certifications that have already been covered during the Coffee Break series include the Living Building Challenge, Green Globes, G-Pro, which is an operations and maintenance green building certification system, True, which is focused on zero waste, Rely, which is focused on resilience, and Well, which is focused on health and safety. And the last three, True, Rely, and Well, are all systems that USGBC either developed or administers through the GBCI. The other ones are not through the USGBC or GBCI. Some certifications by the USGBC and GBCI not previously covered in the Coffee Break series this year include LEED, which we're going to be talking about quite a bit today, the GBCI's guiding principles, which are LEED-like principles to streamline certification for federal buildings, including the Department of Defense buildings. Park Smart, which is really a parking garage certification system. So we can't certify parking garages under LEED, but the Park Smart system can be used to do that. PEER, which is really for utility generation, to move utility plants to more renewable use and to streamline the grid for spread of renewable energy. Again, that's a USGBC product. The Investor Confidence Project, which is really aimed at developers for large projects where they frequently have large portfolios of multiple commercial office space. And EDGE, which is excellence in design for greater efficiencies, which is really aimed at contractors and developers, again, primarily that do multiple buildings that are fairly similar, and really to streamline those processes to help them be more effective in terms of green building. Turning back to LEED, LEED is the most widespread green building rating system in the world. There are 8 different major components to LEED, including building design and construction, which is probably the majority of the buildings are certified under that with LEED. But also LEED for interior design and construction. So that really is for interiors projects, primarily just in interiors renovations and new interiors projects. Although in some cases, BD+C can be used for those as well. Buildings operation and maintenance. There's another one for really improving the performance of existing buildings. And also it could be new buildings just on the, predominantly on the facility side, to really focus on that. LEED for homes and LEED for neighborhood developments. And then there's LEED for cities and communities, which a lot of cities are adopting, and looking community-wide at the kinds of things that LEED normally looks at, including really improving waste management and recycling, city water use and citywide energy use as well, but a number of things. LEED 0 is kind of an addition to LEED, if you will, in some senses, where that can be applied to LEED BD+C projects or LEED commercial interiors projects, and even to O&M projects or buildings operations and maintenance, to certify zero carbon, zero waste, which would be the true component of the zero waste. So zero energy, and I may have mentioned zero water. So primarily those 4. And then there's the ability to recertify projects, particularly O&M projects. Should be recertified every so often to really maintain that the credibility of the certification system. So those are the predominant LEED green building rating systems that we don't always think of some of those, but they're there. So I think most of us are familiar with LEED and the kind of categories it involves. Just checking my time here. So we can ask really what's next with LEED? Where is LEED going? LEED version 4.1 was kind of a LEED 4 was really a big step up, and version 4.1 is an evolution of that, which is available now for users. You can certify either under version 4 or 4.1, but 4.1 has some current enhancements to respond to current needs and trends in the marketplace. But really the vision for LEED is to become LEED positive, and that's been a vision for a while. LEED continues to ramp up requirements and evolve the requirements, but it's really a vision to push beyond the negative impacts of buildings and really make buildings net positive. There are some very significant challenges faced in the built environment, which are targeted through 2050, that respond to issues of health, social equity, water scarcity, air quality, resilience, and climate change. And all the LEED tools are, almost all the LEED tools, if not all the LEED tools, are aimed at addressing those issues. But in particular, LEED positive is really to continue to invest in LEED version 4.1 and the adoption of LEED version 4.1. And USGBC has already spent over $2 million in doing that. So they're deeply invested in really working with the communities to move that forward. They're really invested in also trying to get people to use the ARC platform a lot more. So ARC is a tool that is free to LEED users, It also can be used for a fee independently of LEED, but it includes the ability to rate different performance categories. So you can see graphically and numerically, how you're performing against, or how your building project is performing against other buildings. And so the ARC platform allows you to do that, and really is going to evolve and evolving into a very useful database for the USGBC to really track how buildings are doing compared to how they say, they may be doing under the LEED scoring system. So that's kind of a bridge, if you will, between the kind of thing that Living Building Challenge does, which is, you can't get certified to Living Building Challenge without proving your energy performance and water performance, for instance. With LEED, it's all based on design data. So you can be certified after the building's designed, but before it's actually been performing for a while. So ARC is kind of a bridge for that. LEED continues to move up its energy goals, not only for existing buildings, but also for new buildings. So there's continual ramp up of energy requirements. And then the goal is to get to net positive performance in carbon, energy, and other LEED categories. So USGBC continues to look at other LEED categories for both new construction and existing buildings, where they're going to be ramping up requirements for net positive energy, or net positive performance, excuse me. And I'll go through this pretty quickly, but I just want to point out that, another thing, carbon and climate change is a huge issue. And I read an article yesterday from Fast Company, where they had, I think, 30 top designers in the world say what they thought the most pressing design issues were. And most of the, I think the biggest category of those designers was climate change. So I won't say most of the designers cited climate change, but more than any other category, they cited climate change. And so, carbon reductions is a huge issue. We've learned how to reduce operational carbon, the energy use to operate buildings. Most people that are doing LEED have gotten quite good at that. We know how to do that. The engineers know how to do that. Architects are much better at doing that. So now then the predominant energy use over time becomes embodied energy in the building materials and the construction of a project. So current buildings, 28% of the energy of carbon is building operations, and 11% is building materials. And most of those are in concrete, steel, and aluminum. But this chart shows really how over time, so over a 20-year period, an energy efficient building, so the kinds of energy efficient buildings we design today, the carbon content under current practices of the construction and the building materials outstrips the operational energy in 15 years or so. So the operational energy can be reduced too over time. So even if we design a building today, that is easy to change. Well, I shouldn't say easy, it's not always easy, but we keep getting better at improving performance over time. So we have the ability to do that. But once the building's built, it's very difficult to reduce the carbon content of the building. So, there's a great need to focus on reducing carbon content in our building products now. So part of what next is materials alignment. So regarding not just carbon, but human health, climate health, ecosystem health, social health and equity, and a circular economy. So the AIA has been doing a lot of work on that and has developed the Architecture and Design Materials Pledge. There's a link to that. So that's an evolving system that is helping move the architectural field and design field forward on the material side. And Mindful Materials have worked with the folks at Mindful Materials in terms of alignment, but also looked at LEED and Living Building Challenge to, again, work at alignment. So a lot of the goals become, consistent and more widespread through the practice, not just people doing LEED buildings. So that leads us to discussion time. So I'm glad to open it up and have discussion, ask questions, comments. Thanks for your attention so far.
Hannah, you put a question in the chat. Do you want to say what that was?
Very simply, there's such an urgency to change so many things in the next 8 years to get to 2030. And so many of the projections, Ralph, that you're showing us are for 2050. And my concern is that there's just not an urgency within LEED to really address what happens in the next 8 years.
Yeah, I think that, that definitely a valid comment. I think we're all feeling the urgency. I know LEED has always been focused on market transformation and moving, finding the right pace to move forward. And I think that's, a huge part of their success is that they try to push the marketplace, but they found in some cases they pushed too hard. For instance, they had to back off a little bit on LEED version 4 introduction because the marketplace didn't seem quite ready to adopt all that. And so even in LEED version 4.1, they found they had to adjust and roll back some criteria. So yeah, that's a real issue, is how do you get there fast enough? And I would say that, well, it's LEED's goal, and LEED, USGBC has worked with ASHRAE, with the International Lighting, International Illuminating Engineering Society of North America, and others to ramp up criteria and goals, and affected a lot of building codes and other things. What I can say is, while LEED is doing a lot and USGBC is doing a lot, they can't do it alone. So, a lot of people have to really pitch in and do this. And I think we need a lot more support by the federal government and even by state government. So we know that politics is tricky and convoluted. I'm hopeful that the current federal administration will be successful in advancing a lot, because we're sure hearing a lot of a tremendous amount of chatter about the need and the desire to do much more. And so, again, as some of you are aware, Mahesh Ramanujam is stepping down starting November 1st as president and CEO. Peter Templeton is the current interim president of USGBC, and the board and USGBC is embarking on a strategic plan to really map out the future of the USGBC and LEED. So, so I'm hopeful that they find some ability to ramp up the game.
Susan, you put your hand up. Did you have something you wanted to say?
Yes, and ask, again, I have to echo Hannah's urgency comment. And then, Ralph, what I heard you say was it's the market that's, resistant to urgency and leadership. And then, Mike, you also mentioned the federal government. So federal government, in my experience, they take information from feeder organizations, consensus organizations, and the federal government, the laws and the rules are going to have much more resistance because they have to go through lobbyists, et cetera. So can you give me an example? Here's my question. Can you give me an example of something that the market was resistant to, the marketplace was resistant to in the revision from 4 to 4.1?
Yes, they were resistant to the ramp up in energy performance goals for one thing. They're resistant to some of the materials goals, the building product disclosure and optimization goals, which is interesting because on environmental product declarations, version 4.1 ruled back the number of EPDs required to achieve a point. But in the transition time, the marketplace evolved and it became much easier to to use EPDs. So on the material side, we're seeing some good movement from manufacturers where there was initial resistance. There's just a lag, I think, a lag in a lot of these things that take time to do and evolve. So those are two cases where we saw resistance from the marketplace.
But again, thank you for that. Thank you very much for that. An excellent example and answer. But again, because what LEED writes is their guidelines, they're not laws or rules. You don't have to calculate the impact of the expense of your rule or your guideline. It's a good opportunity as we go forward doing strategy to lead rather than to just to be a leader and the leader. Because one of the things that impressed me about LEED when I got my AP was I felt as this is where all the great studies went, as opposed to in the EPA regulations and OSHA regulations. Like, no, this is where that lives. So again, that's being the leader is probably a good strategy. Thank you.
Yeah, there's a reason there in what the USGBC is in Washington, D.C. The USGBC does do a lot in terms of advocacy to the federal government. And I've participated in at least two government advocacy days where we went to Washington and spoke to legislators. But they're constantly advocating to the federal and state government and working on building codes and so on and so forth. The American Institute of Architects does the same thing, also located in Washington, D.C. So they are advocating very strongly on issues of climate change, building performance, social equity, and you name it, just like USGBC is. So, so there are a lot of people working towards similar kinds of goals, and once in a while they actually work towards alignment. So, I think there's going to be a lot of strength in alignment.
I think that there's some good conversation about some of these things for urgency and need, and you sort of demonstrated that in your slide about how the operations is such a big component and the urgency and need to get there. And Hannah brings up a point in the chat where she says, when will the conversation turn to build less and use less? So we're talking about using less, like resources and embodied carbon, and because of the urgency, and it takes a little while to build a building. What are we doing now to impact operations and maintenance, and push that further, because that's something we can have more immediate, right?
Right. Yeah, I think that's the LEED O&M system is really aimed at that, to really help with operations and maintenance. I think there's not as much uptake of that as I think we would all hope. So LEED O&M, it has actually had a lot of adoption, but not as great as BD+C. So I'm sure part of the strategic plan is focused on that. It's interesting in preparing for this presentation. I was looking for data on LEED by the numbers. So we have had in the past, different presentations that reported on, how many LEED projects, how much square footage, things like that from year to year. And I know a few years ago, Paul, we were involved together in a presentation where we looked at that, and we saw a slowdown, then. So LEED had such exponential growth for a while, but it did slow down, and I'm sure that's a concern. I'm sure some of that had to do with politics, federal politics, and federal leadership. Over the past 4 years, I'm hoping that a change in ideology and leadership is going to be much more positive in that regard publicly, because certainly the administration has expressed desires and goals to be much more positive on carbon in particular, on climate change issues. So I'm hoping that that kind of leadership does influence a lot of people positively and helps move the needle forward. It takes all of us working together, and there's been such resistance and such division politically to so many of these issues just based on political ideology. And I'm hoping some of that's going to dissolve, and those lines will get crossed.
So are the current requirements to reduce carbon sufficient, given the pressing issues of climate change?
Well, I think it goes back to Hannah's question. They're probably not sufficient. They're probably not the kind of aggressive movement we'd like to see. But again, I think LEED and USGBC has been trying to balance what the marketplace will accept, because the theory being, and I'm not involved with USGBC planning this out, but I understand a little bit about the theory being that if you set the bar too high, then people are going to back off adoption of the system. They're not going to do it. And there are other systems out there that are less stringent. There are systems that are more stringent, like Living Building Challenge. So, I think we see numbers on Living Building Challenge actually quite low, which is, it's unfortunate, but, that bar is set so high that it's difficult for a lot of people to achieve that. And so they're not seeing the kinds of numbers. So, USGBC has taken the approach that they want to set the bar reasonably high and, affect large numbers of buildings and square footages and large real estate portfolios. And they've had quite a bit of success doing that. So, I'm hopeful that, all the talk about climate change and all the negative impacts that we're seeing right now are really going to get to people, and business owners and developers and more are going to say this is going to be a core principle of our business to advance this, and it's our corporate social responsibility to protect us all against climate change,
So,
and
Ralph,
social equity and so forth.
You bring up a really good point. There are a lot of other rating systems out there, which is part of our certification series. But if a client came to you, and this is really for everybody, if they came to you and they said, well, we want to do more, we would like to get certified, we just don't know what to do, or maybe they're specifically focused on one certification, how would you guide them through that conversation?
Yeah, I think it's really a discussion of trying to understand your client and your client's needs. So there's a discovery process that happens, and that, part of that's exploring and setting performance goals. So, looking at the kinds of categories that are in LEED, Living Building Challenge, and some other certifications, and saying, where are your priorities? Are you focused on, carbon reduction? Because we can focus on a net positive energy building. We can do that now. So, you can do that within LEED. The LEED zero certification, you can have a net zero carbon or net zero energy building right now, under that, and have it certified to that. Of course, you can also do that in the normal BD+C or ID+C project. You can still shoot for net zero. So it's really understanding your client and what their needs are, what their desires are, and where they want to focus their efforts. But sometimes it takes a little steering too, because they don't always know. So there's some guidance. You have to open them up to what the options are, and frankly, sometimes there's some resistance. We have clients, some large clients that have a lot of different stakeholders, and sometimes there's one stakeholder that has a lot of power that just doesn't want to, that has different ideas, that doesn't really understand, some of the reasons, and doesn't want to necessarily, buy into some of the reasons to do some of the things. So, that can get in the way too. So again, that's a function of the marketplace and client realities.
So Ralph, this is Hannah. How or who are the people to really start a major communication effort around buildings and energy use? Because one-on-one with the building owner, it's easy to say, no, not this time, it costs too much. But where's a major campaign that really talks about the urgency of 2030, what different building adaptations or equipment can do. Like, where's that information out in the worldwide conversation? And who, you know, could the USGBC be one of the voices really pushing that information?
So yeah, I think that's absolutely, and I think the USGBC is trying to be one of those major voices. You know, Green Build, is this still going on? Right now, I think it is. You know, I think, you know, Green Build's a major effort in that, for one. The AIA is really doing a lot there as well. But I'm sure other professional organizations are as well. I hear it, you know, I read it in construction magazines, I read about it in engineering magazines. So, you know, a lot of people are talking it and pushing it. And, you know, I'd like to say it would be great if things could be more united. And I think that's where the alignment issue comes in, is that USGBC has for years been working with ASHRAE and IESNA and others to, you know, to align energy performance goals, for instance. You know, carbon, you know, we're seeing, again, we didn't talk much about it, but in the BPDO, material BPDO credits, building performance and disclosure and optimization, building product disclosure and optimization credits, there's issues of LCA where we can do life cycle analysis and really focus on the carbon content, you know, of our buildings, and also the environmental impact and other environmental categories. But so, you know, people have to want to do it. Again, we've been doing LCA now. We have clients that, again, just because of schedules and other issues, you know, to really work in reducing the embodied carbon in the building project has been, you know, it's a difficult thing to do. So we're in a transition period where all the players are trying to catch up and get on the same page. So you know, Paul, when we work with contractors, you know, really helps if the contractor's already on board to, you know, with their concrete supplier and others to really work, you know, have strategies to reduce the carbon content of concrete, so that when, you know, the structural engineer and others are trying to work together to do that, you know, all players are on the same page. But again, it's an evolutionary process. This issue of LCA and reducing embodied carbon is relatively new. It's been in discussion for at least 10 years, but I would say in the last, you know, 3 to 5 years, it's really become more mainstream. And I know a lot of people are probably just hearing about it for the first time too. So, you know, it just takes time. As much as, you know, we want things to be done now.
And as you mentioned, Ralph, it really is client driven so many times, you know, and that's where we struggle. And like you mentioned, it's also good to encourage. But lately, what's gotten involved in the discussion is the availability of materials. That really is throwing a monkey wrench in the whole thing. So not only are we trying to steer people towards the right materials, but we're trying to steer folks towards materials that are available. And you know, I had always hoped maybe there was going to be some shimmering light of sustainable products that were going to rise to the top and become eminently more available than other non-sustainable products. I've yet to kind of see it happen right yet, but you know, time and time again, 5 times a day, we just hear subcontractors squawking and our suppliers squawking about getting the materials in a timely manner.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we see that too. Of course, you know, it's just, you know, I really feel for the CMs and contractors just trying to keep the project moving with staff, with materials. You know, just some projects I'm trying to do at home. It's been very frustrating to be able to get things in a timely manner. And I don't know how you're doing it. You know, I don't know how people are doing on the big projects. You have to be that much in front of the curve to get things right now. So yeah, I understand that it's today there are a lot of challenges with COVID and the workplace and the whole things that are going on. So yeah, let's hope we can get through this. You know, I think we're continually learning how to get through this, and hopefully things are getting better, but it's a challenge. So I was going to pull up one thing. this issue of finding materials. So again, this isn't necessarily getting them delivered on site, but Mindful Materials is one resource that we've been using a lot to help us find products that meet different sorts of sustainability criteria. It's my favorite source. Other people have other favorites, but they are really aligning with LEED, with LBC, with AIA's materials pledge, and they're adding social equity, which has been a difficult category, for people to add in material selection. So, the USGBC, by the way, continues to improve their game there, and so, it's a long time between versions of LEED, but you say the LEED pilot credits have been one avenue where USGBC has been able to introduce newer concepts and test them in the marketplace using the pilot credit platform and social equity. There's some newer social equity credits that pilot credits that again are aligned with these other things. They're all aligned together. So hopefully it's just going to build a stronger sustainability case for across the board, not only on social equity, but on carbon and other things as well.
Well, thank you so much, Ralph, for this amazing conversation. And although we keep these to 30 minutes, lively conversation, thanks for continuing it on a little bit longer. I really do appreciate that. We do have some other really great educational programs coming up. We'll have our LEED tour, which will be at WashU's as a virtual program of WashU's campus that will be coming up. I'm looking for the date for that. It is on the 12th of October. So be on the lookout for that information. We also have our call for proposals that we've extended to the 30th, just as a reminder. All right, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate all the great questions.
Thanks,
Good job, Ralph.
And
See ya.
discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.